Hi there. If you're ever thinking of using a BSP bet through automation in Fairbot, you may want to specify lower and upper limits for the odds taken for that BSP bet. And there's a subtle way of doing that, which I'll explain here. So first of all, I'm going to set this to start at the scheduled off time. The action required is place a BSP bet. We need to specify it as being at runtime. For this particular example, stick in the amount you want, and here you can see you can specify minimum odds that will be taken. So let's, for the sake of argument, set that to 2. Notice that if you do a lay BSP bet, it changes to the maximum odds taken. So what's going to happen there is that in the case of a back bet, when Betfair works out the SP, if the SP is lower than the minimum odds that you specify there, then Betfair will effectively cancel that BSP request. Keep in mind that when you submit a BSP request, you cannot cancel it. So this is the only way that it will actually get ignored, if the odds have fallen below your required limit. Note, however, that there isn't a maximum option, so you can't specify an upper limit. Now, generally speaking, if you're applying a BSP bet, you want the highest odds that you can get. However, you may have a strategy that as the odds increase, it becomes less effective, so you may want to limit the upper value of the odds so that the BSP isn't actually submitted in the first place. Now, the way to do that is you need to specify conditions. So you need to check the odds of the runner concerned. So again, we need to choose at runtime. Best back odds, let's say, is less than or equal to 10. So in this case, what will happen is when this rule tries to fire at the scheduled off time, if the current odds of your selection is greater than 10, then this BSP request will not be submitted. If it is less than 10, it will be submitted, as long as it's, well, that's not strictly true. I was about to say as long as it's bigger than 2. That's not true. That thing only kicks in when BSP is calculated by Betfair at the start of the race. There's one caveat to this, however. When this rule kicks in and the odds are less than 10, this bet will be submitted. However, if there's a delay to the race between this bet being submitted, you may find that the odds then go up above your limit. Unfortunately, there's no way to stop that happening. Your BSP will be taken at those higher odds. So that's just one caveat that you need to be aware of. So you may want to artificially lower this a little bit lower than the odds that you're prepared to take, if you see what I mean. So if we save that and assign it to this race here, you'll see that we've now got 2 unknown options from which you can click on and get a drop down menu to choose your runner. Now, I've said many times in the past that generally speaking, if you're using the at runtime option, it's best not to have multiple options to choose the same runner. It increases the amount of time taken to set up your race, and the more places you have to specify your runner, the greater the risk of inadvertently making a mistake and selecting the wrong runner in your haste to get things done. So we can adjust this instead, so there's only one place to have that selection. So let's just go back to the strategy editor, add in a new rule, which will be called select runner. We're going to set this off at 5 seconds before the scheduled off time. The action will be place a bet. It will be at runtime. A lay bet in this case. We're just going to set up what I like to call a controlling bet. It's going to be odds of 1.01 for a value of 1, so there's going to be a liability of a penny. It's not going to be kept, so that liability will disappear when the race starts, because it's very unlikely that this bet will ever be matched before the off. And there's no need for any conditions. So if we move that up, we need to adjust this rule again, and instead of using the at runtime option, we use by last bet in both the action tab and the conditions tab. That needs to be by last bet. So what does that mean? Well, this rule will essentially refer to the last bet placed, which is going to be placed by this one. It doesn't matter the size of the bet, and it doesn't matter that it's unmatched. That's the last bet that you've placed, and so that is used to identify the runner concerned. So now what happens is you'll see that these unknowns can't be selected. There's only one place to select your runner. So when that rule kicks in, 5 seconds before the scheduled off, that will place a small bet at 1.01. This rule then kicks in 5 seconds later, and it recognises it as that bet at 1.01 as being the last bet you've placed, assuming you haven't clicked and manually submitted another bet, of course. And then that will kick in, and it will check to see that the runner identified by the last bet is currently less than or equal to 10. And if it is, it will submit the BSP. If it's not, it won't submit the BSP. In the event of a delay, as I mentioned earlier, this could potentially still climb above your limit, so you might want to reduce that to a little bit lower than your upper limit that you are looking for. But also to limit this rule hanging around monitoring the market until the race actually starts, you may want to put in if we go back to the strategy editor, you may actually want to put in a stop part as well. So choose stop at relative to start time and put that in, it's let's say just 5 seconds after. So this rule will be active for 5 seconds from the scheduled off time to 5 seconds after the scheduled off time, and if the race hasn't started by that point, this rule won't fire, and consequently you won't have a bet submitted at all. Okay, so that's how you can try and simulate the opposite end of your odds limit using a BSP. Okay guys, thanks very much. Speak to you later.